Hello and welcome to this episode of Unbound. I'm Nicola Humber, author of Unbound and founder of the Unbound Press. And today I'm delighted to be joined by one of the newest authors at the Unbound Press, Sansom, who is in the process of, she's virtually finished writing her book, Desire Lines, which is going to be released later this summer. So we're very excited that Anna has joined the Unbound Press. Anna was a member of the first round of the Unbound Writing Mastermind. And as soon as we had our first conversation about Desire Lines, and we'll kind of talk more about what the book is about during our conversation, but as soon as Anna started to tell me about it, I had tingles, like literally full body chills. And so I was secretly hoping that she would decide to join the Unbound Press. There was no pressure, but I was extremely delighted when she decided to join us. So welcome, Anna.
Thank you. Thank you for that lovely introduction. And thank you for inviting me to have this conversation. It's always a delight to speak with you. And I'm really excited to share more about Desire Lines and about whatever else arises during this conversation. So yes, lovely to see you.
Oh, fantastic. Yes, we're very open to whatever wants to come forward during this conversation. So let's dive in. Anna, and I do always tend to start these conversations with the same question, which is, obviously the theme of this series and also all of my work is about being unbound. But I'm curious to know if there's a time in your life or a situation in your life where you have felt particularly bound in the past and how you moved beyond that.
It's such a good question. So I can remember a really pivotal point for me. I was about 30 years old. I was living in Edinburgh and I was walking to work. And I remember looking down at my shoes and looking down at the pavement and just thinking, oh, I can't keep doing this. And to give a bit of context, I'd been in the job for a couple of years. I'd taken a little bit of time out to go traveling when I could. The shoes were important because the shoes I'd got from a bargain store. And I convinced myself they were camel coloured, but they were beige. They were definitely beige. And this was before nude shoes were popular. So I just remember looking at my feet on the pavement in beige shoes, walking the same way I walk to work every single day and just thinking, I can't keep doing this. I can't. And I felt really constrained. I felt really stuck and bored and just like, I can still feel the feeling because it was such a moment of thinking, if I'm not going to keep doing this, what am I going to do? And actually the what turned out to be going to live in New Zealand for a year. Wow. So I had done some traveling and some voluntary work in New Zealand previously. And I ended up, it was a huge gamble. So I convinced my partner this was a really good idea, that we should just quit our jobs and go to New Zealand. We spent some time decorating the flat so we could rent it out. We put our stuff in storage. I managed to get a job interview lined up, but we left for New Zealand not knowing if either of us had an interview. I didn't have a work visa. I would only get the work visa if I got accepted for the job. And we sort of said, well, worst case scenario, we go and have a couple of months traveling. There was a 6-month lease on the flat. We can always come back. Well, as it happened, I got the job and we ended up staying for a year. And the irony is that I wasn't particularly happy in that job either, job in New Zealand, because it was still walking to work every day. I had different shoes. But I made the change. I'd recognised that my situation wasn't good enough for me. I felt too stuck, and I did something which I think is quite a dramatic, risky change, but actually it worked out really well. And that then led to being, I think, more willing and able to keep moving around a lot more, which is what I've done for the last couple of decades until I got to where I live now. And I've actually been here nearly 8 years and my feet are so itchy. I'm so ready to move on again. But there's something about that feeling of, and I tried all the different things. Like I'd got off the bus a stop earlier and walked a different path and all, but it wasn't that. It was that I fundamentally needed to change something. And the other thing that changed from my experience in New Zealand was I then realized that one job isn't enough for me. And so I started to develop a portfolio career. And even though I was working full time in New Zealand, I was writing and running workshops on the side as well. And it really kind of taught me that I don't have to fit into this one model, and that I can branch off in lots of different directions whenever I choose, really. So I think that was the biggest lesson from that whole experience, was about I don't need to limit myself to one thing.
Yeah.
If that one thing isn't enough for me.
Exactly. So much there that we could dive into. First of all, I want to say I'm always in awe of people's partners when they agree to take these leaps of faith. Like, let's move to the other side of the well. Oh, okay. So deep gratitude to all of the partners who are willing to take these kind of unbound steps. And I love what you shared there about, even once you got to New Zealand, which is a huge step, to do that. But that kind of recognizing that even though you were living in a different country, actually the job wasn't what you wanted to do, and giving yourself permission to create this portfolio career where you're doing all of these different things and meeting, I guess, all of these different desires and needs within yourself. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think, as women, as the good girls, we're really taught that we should pick one thing and stick to it. So you choose a family, or you choose a career, or, and there's something about not having to say, well, what if it's and rather than or?
Yeah. So not limiting ourselves, like either I can do this or I can do that, and I can't do both, but going, no, maybe I can do both of them and something else as well. And what was that like for you, Anna? Can you just talk us through the process a bit more about how you kind of tuned in and discovered that actually you did have these different desires about what you wanted to do with your life?
So I think I'd always been, I heard this beautiful phrase the other day of being a multipassionate person. And I just thought, that's, rather than someone who can't settle on something, to say, I'm multipassionate. So when I was younger, I loved craft and drama, and I also loved science. And then when I went to university, I was doing my degree, but I was also in a band. And then when I had the job, but I was also doing these other projects. And I think for me, and this is where it already links into desire lines, because for me, a lot of my creative energy, my passionate energy, it needs an outlet. And if I'm not passionate enough about my day job, then I'm always going to need to find another outlet for that aspect of me. Otherwise, I just feel stagnant. I feel dulled. It's just not me. And after I sort of did the whole, I'm a student and I'm in a band, then I thought, well, I have to have the job and I have to be sensible and start my career. But that was never going to work for me. It just wasn't. And my interest in sexuality had always been something very present for me. I think as a teenager, I was reading a lot of feminist books and questioning a lot of things around gender and sexuality and how we are allowed to be in the world, and that aspect of questioning things has always been really important to me, and I sort of see it as a curiosity. So when you combine those things, someone who's very curious and asks a lot of questions, but someone who needs a creative, passionate outlet, and is still a good girl and has to do the sensible and right thing and have the job. I think, you know, it's almost like a Venn diagram, and I end up with me in the middle. And at different times in my life, those different overlapping circles of the Venn diagram have expanded or contracted depending on what's going on. But it really doesn't feel like a choice. Like I can't not do these other things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love that idea of the Venn diagram that you talk about there, because I've kind of talked about kind of the way we are in the world in the same way at times, and sometimes that can be limiting. It's like we back ourselves into this really small space in the middle of all these intersecting points, like all these different roles that we play, all of these different kind of expectations that we're trying to meet. And I love the way that you talk about it. It actually sounds very, very freeing, and actually at times you can kind of maybe move into one of the other circles, or and spend more time there. So I love the way you describe that. Tell us more about desire lines, because I know people watching will be curious about, well, what is this book about? And like I said, the first time you spoke to me about the idea of desire lines, like in town planning, and how that relates to your book, I was so fascinated. So yeah, tell us a bit more about it.
So in town planning, and I don't have any background knowledge in this, just purely a concept I came across, and my curious mind went, oh, what can I do with that? So in town planning, when they build a new town or they're creating a new public space, they think about where they're going to put the pavements and the roads and the crossings and all those kind of things. But what inevitably happens is people don't want to use the paths that have been laid out. So you often see it, there'll be a piece of pavement which will go like that, and there'll be a bit of grass, and people will take the diagonal. They won't go the long way around. They will make their own path across the grass or wherever it is. And so in town planning, these paths that people make are called desire lines or desire paths. And what they illustrate is the actual route that people want to take. And in some really innovative countries, what they've done is they've, before they've built the town, they've just sort of like put in the various buildings. So here's the library, here's the hospital. They've not put any pavements in, and they've actually mapped the routes that people walk. And on campus, university campuses, like that, they map the routes that people actually take, and then they put paths down to follow the paths that people have made. So this was the concept. And I love this idea of there are all these set paths that we're told we should be taking. They're nice, they're tarmacked, they're swept clean. Hopefully they're not covered in chewing gum. But inevitably, if we really tune into what's important to us or the direction that we want to go in, we might find ourselves coming off the path. And so Desire Lines, the book, is all about what happens when we come off the known paths that have been laid out for us as women who have a sexuality and want to express that sexuality in the world. What happens when we come off the preset paths and make our own paths? And I call those paths our individual desire lines. And it's very much about, these are very individual and very personalised to each of us. And I'm always really keen to stress that it's not about comparing one person's paths to another. It's really saying, what do I need and want? What matters to me? How can I create this in my life? And then making that path. So I wrote the book, Desire Lines, just like that, with a lot of help through the Unbound Writing Mastermind, which was a wonderful experience. And I had done a lot of writing before, so I'm a published erotic author. I used to have a blog called the Lady Garden Project, which I loved, where I wrote about women's sexuality in a quite a creative way. And Desire Lines is sort of a culmination of a lot of personal experiences, and also following these lines of curiosity, to think about what are some of the main obstacles that we as women come up against on our paths. So what are the obstacles, but also what are the opportunities? And I explore lots of different things, everything from how we experience and express our gender, through to sexuality, so sexual expression, you know, who do you choose as a partner or partners, as the case may be, and also what kind of sexual expression really does it for you.
Yeah.
So I do talk about kink, and I talk about BDSM, and I talk about polyamory, and I talk about all these other things which are kind of on the edge, I would say, of mainstream now. I don't think they're so far away as they used to be, but I think they're still kind of on the edge. So you wouldn't necessarily see those paths laid out for you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, you know, as with anything else, certainly with sexuality, we tend to get onto like a particular path, and, you know, as we go through our lives, maybe we kind of shut ourselves down from any other possibility. It's like, well, no, this is me, this is the path that I'm on, this is the kind of relationship or relationships that I want, and we don't even think about kind of possibilities outside of it. And what I love about, there's so much I love about Desire Life, but, you know, it's such an expansive book. I found it a very expansive experience to read it. And also the way you bring your own story and stories into the book, you know, in a courageous way. I love how you've done that. And I wonder, you know, what was that like for you? Because a lot of the women that I speak to about writing books, or in the process of writing a book, or just sharing their stories maybe online or through their blogs or whatever it is, there's this reticence, there's this kind of idea that, oh, well, no one will want to hear about me, my personal story, or a fear of putting it out there and being judged or criticised. So, not that I want to freak you out before you go.
What are you doing?
I know. You're like, actually, no, I'm not going to. But what's that process been like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I have felt, and I continue to feel vulnerable about it. I think one thing I would say, that in sharing my stories, what I'm actually asking is for each person who's reading the book to consider her own stories.
Yeah.
So I want my stories to kind of be a vehicle to self-exploration for the reader. So it's kind of, I don't want it to be the me show. But I think that stories are really powerful. And I think that sometimes we don't hear enough diversity of stories to begin to really explore and question our own. So I have felt this really interesting combination of vulnerability, of shame, of fear, of courage, of, damn it, I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
And I talk about this in the book as well, but one of the things that really helped me, and I was completely unprepared for this, is that when I'm really interested in archetypes and how we work with archetypes, different archetypes in our lives. And I'll go a little bit off track, but I love that film, the new film that came out, Wonder Woman. And for quite a while, I felt like I really want to embody Wonder Woman.
Yeah.
Like she, that's what I want. Anyway, I watched the film quite a few times. But what happened when I started writing Desire Lines was another archetype came through. And this archetype is the archetype of Lilith. And if anybody's not familiar with Lilith, Lilith was reputedly Adam, as in Adam and Eve's first wife, and she was created equally to Adam by God, and they lived together in the Garden of Eden until he began to insist that he was superior to her. And at that point she said, no, we're equal, we've been created equally, and she left the Garden of Eden. And the powerfulness of that sense of walking away from the only thing she knew, something that was meant to be paradise. This is the best it's ever going to get. But she said, no, it's not good enough for me. It's not, if I can't be your equal, that's not enough for me. And she left, not knowing what she was walking towards. Now, that level of courage and vulnerability to me is huge. And it's a story, and she's an archetype. But the presence of Lilith stayed with me throughout the writing of the book, and I'm still very aware of that presence now, such that the times when I felt this is too scary, I kind of checked in with her, and I actually use Lilith stories throughout the book as well. So I created some fictional stories about this archetype of Lilith and what she might do, and I used her to explore some of the more erotic encounters that are in the book. So that's not me, it's Lilith. And I also really checked in with, why am I sharing this particular story of mine? Does this feel ethical to me? Does this fit with my values to be sharing this? Am I sufficiently protecting anyone else who might be associated with the story? Because my sexuality is my story, but inevitably there have been other people who've been involved in that. So I was very keen to sort of to keep questioning myself, and I think that's a theme that comes through the book as well. It's like, keep asking yourselves the questions, because the more we know ourselves and have that self-awareness, the more we can make the choices about who gets to hear our stories, what stories do they get to hear, how do we want to redesign our stories. Is this a story, like you said earlier, is this a story or a path I want to keep walking, or is it time to move on to a new one and sort of take the lessons from that, or not, and choose something different. So as I'm sort of getting ready for Desire Lines to come out into the world, I've been reading a lot of Brené Brown and reciting to myself.
Special.
Yes. Her mantra of today I choose courage over comfort. And she talks about standing in the arena as well, so you actually, it's okay to put yourself in the position of saying your truth.
Absolutely.
And people can read it or not read it. They can like it or not like it. They can like me or not like me, which is kind of hard to think about. Someone might not like me, but there's so many writers who have helped me over the years, like through sharing their stories. They have given me a lot of hope and courage and understanding of my place in the world. And so I kind of just, it sounds so cliched, but I want to do my bit as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think I really feel this sense when you're talking, and you're talking about the kind of feelings that have come up, vulnerability, shame, but also kind of, courage, I'm just going to do it. These are all feelings, and we talked about this during the mastermind, but these are all feelings, the kind of feelings that your readers are likely to experience as they're reading Desire Lines. And I think, it's really important for any writer to talk about kind of going first and allowing yourself to experience those feelings and to be with those feelings, so that your reader is able to kind of experience that and have their own process, their transformational process as they're reading it. So you described that so beautifully, and I love how you talk about these different archetypes that we can call on, and there's this real sense that you weren't alone during your writing process, because you were able to call on Lilith. And for different people, they'll be able to call, sometimes I talk about calling on your unbound self, or any of these other archetypes that we want to call on. But I know, like you say, even though you've kind of come towards the end of the writing process, as we move to kind of sharing more about Desire Lines, it's wonderful that Lilith is still there with you. And like recently you shared a post about like some advice that she kind of gave you that your story is your power. Like our stories are our power. And that feels like there's just a real truth about that. When I saw you share that, it feels so true to me, and I think it's really important that we recognize that. So how did that come through for you? Because when I saw the post, I was like, oh my goodness, it's so important, so powerful.
When I started writing Desire Lines, I was doing a lot of traveling at the time. I was going up and down to Scotland a lot, and my life was very disjointed.
Mm-hmm.
And I kept thinking, these aren't the ideal circumstances to be writing a book. However, it was also the time when I had some time to write the book. And what I used to do at the start of each writing session was just do a little sort of 3-minute meditation. I mean, it was very brief. And for me, that it was a very visual, I'm a visual person, it was very visual, and it was about sitting around a campfire in the woods with a bunch of other women.
Mm-hmm.
And during this visualization, everyone got a turn to tell their story, and were witnessed and heard, and they could say as much or as little as they want. And the sort of the visual finished with me being handed the talking stick or whatever it was, and it was my turn. It was my turn to tell my story. And connecting with Lilith was a similar thing. So it was a little bit of a meditation, but also really kind of connecting in here. I don't know where she is, yeah. but connecting into myself first, connecting into my heart, connecting into my soul, connecting into my power, and then connecting with Lilith as this representation of woman, person. You know, I'm not that hung up on gender, but as a representation of someone who embodies their power, who is intuitive, who is free, who is connected to nature, who knows her inner nature as well as the natural world around her. And so that particular line that I shared recently in social media was during one of these very brief meditations. I mean, it's literally like a couple of breaths and just attending to what's going on. And in that I say, you know, she took my face in her hands and looked me in the eye. And I was saying, I'm scared, why don't I know? She's, you know, just sort of held me and said, your stories are your power. And she said, don't be afraid to be powerful. Because I think that's all part of the good girl thing as well. We're afraid to be our most powerful selves, because we think that to be powerful means we have power over other people, and therefore if I'm powerful, somebody else is less powerful. But of course that's not the case. We can all be powerful in our own way. There's not a finite amount of being powerful.
Absolutely.
There is in the patriarchal world, you know, people with power and people without, but we don't have to agree with that.
Exactly. And when we allow ourselves to be powerful, it actually helps other people to access their own power as well. And I think that's particularly true when we share our stories. When we allow ourselves to be seen, it kind of acts as permission or an activation within others to recognize, oh, okay, you know, my stories are powerful too. So yeah, so good, so gorgeous. Oh, Anna, that's just flown by our time today. And I'm sure we'll definitely talk again when Desire Lines comes out. We're hoping it'll be kind of September time, aren't we? So watch out for that, everybody. And what's the best way for people to kind of connect with you and to find out more about Desire Lines and just keep in touch? What's the best way?
So I would love to connect, really would love to connect with as many people as are interested or curious about any of this stuff. The best way to connect is through social media. So I've got a Facebook page, which is Anna Sansom Writer, and I've got an Instagram account, which is Anna Sansom Writer. But the best way to stay in touch, so if you want to keep hearing about when Desire Lines is out, and and to read some of the sample chapters as well, which are, we've got quite a few sample chapters on my website, which is annasansom.com. And if you go to the website, there's the opportunity to sign up to the newsletter, which just means you'll get some email updates just to sort of stay in the loop. But I'd love to connect on social media as well. I'm really excited about having more of these conversations.
Yeah.
Because I love stories. And I want to know everybody else's stories as well. So any opportunities to connect and share where we're at would be fantastic.
Yeah, it's this gorgeous kind of dynamic process. It really feels like a conversation that you're starting here. And I'm so grateful to you, Anna, for talking with me today and sharing your magic and sharing Desire Lines magic, and also for actually writing this book, because it is just such a potent book and a very powerful experience to read it, and I can't wait for more people to have the opportunity. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And we will see you again next time for another episode of Unbound. Okay, bye.
Bye.